What's up, everybody? It's the Tabletop Tyrant, and I got a treat for you guys because I went through the Liber Necris, and I'm going to give you a rundown on what the book essentially is about, kind of talk a little bit about it. It's really interesting, and I really enjoyed it. So a couple things to note when going into this. It's told through Manfred von Carstein's point of view, so the point of view of a vampire. And we're going to cover everything from the history of Nehekara to Nagash to the vampire bloodlines to what it takes to even summon a particular undead corpse or animate a construct. So without further ado, let's dive into this and talk about it. The first person to chronicle Nehekara was Abdul ben Rashid, who spent 8 years documenting the land. He met a mysterious death, which the Arabic government interpreted as an ominous sign, as most of us would, prompting them to burn his writings. However, not all his works were destroyed. When the Empire, Tilia, and Bretonia later waged campaigns against Araby, they unknowingly brought back copies of his work, unaware of its true significance. 3 millennia before Sigmar, a civilization began to emerge along the River Mortis, known at the time as the Vitae River. 500 years later, this civilization would become recognized as the Kingdom of Nehekara. During this era, while all the humans were scavenging around in the dirt like savages, the Nehekarans had already mastered agriculture and the herding of animals. They built great cities, ships, and roads. Though even these accomplishments paled in comparison to the greatest achievement that the Nehekarans would do: the creation of a written language. According to legend, this language was gifted to the Nehekaran people by their gods. The kingdom of Nehekara was vast and unparalleled, unmatched even by the likes of Grand Cathay. Its splendor and reach were unrivaled, with one city standing above all others: Eternal Khemri. The city rose to prominence when Settra, a legendary warrior and peerless general, unified the region by defeating the ruling monarchs and bringing them under his banner. Settra's reputation as an exceptional leader was well-deserved, but his virtues were shadowed by his flaws. He was known as a bloody-handed tyrant driven by vanity and an unquenchable thirst for power, as I think most tyrants are in this universe. Despite his unmatched prowess, Settra fell to the greatest adversary of all, time. That relentless force that stalks every being claims Settra, how dare it, as it does all men and civilizations. Yet, whether through pride or arrogance, Settra sought to defy death itself. He commanded a group of priests to find a way to overcome mortality. Unlike the fanatical priests of Sigmar, these practitioners were learned scholars, masterful physicians, surgeons, apothecaries, even a few demonologists capable of binding minor demons, or as they call them, jinn. Decades of research ensued, during which these priests used rejuvenation spells to prolong Settra's life. It should be noted, far beyond natural limits. Eventually, however, Settra's time ran out and he lay on his deathbed. The Mortuary Cult formed by these priests surrounding him, and they promised that they could preserve his body and resurrect him once the cure for death was discovered. Displeased by the uncertain vow, Settra threatened every priest, declaring dire consequences if they abandoned their work or broke their oath. And now, after Settra's death, he was entombed, awaiting his resurrection at the hands of his beloved Mortuary Cult. And they were driven by fear. The priests continued their studies. Over time, other kings shared Settra's desire for eternal life, and entombment became a ritual performed for all royalty and their armies. They all would eventually wait for the day they would be revived to enjoy life once more, free from the burden of death. Now, within 5 generations, the Mortuary Cult discovered how to extend their own lives indefinitely. Funny how that works, albeit at a price. Though they remained alive, their bodies continued to age, eventually appearing as desiccated corpses. Yet, despite their appearance, they were far from lifeless. These guys were still formidable and dangerous beings. As with many organizations, the Mortuary Cult gained power and influence. This practice of entombment and waiting for resurrection became a cultural cornerstone in the Nehekaran people. Necropolises were constructed across the kingdoms, and none, obviously, were more magnificent than Settra's, a fitting testament to a ruler without equal. Enter, now, Nagash, the brother of King Tutep of Khemri. Nagash was nearly erased from all Nehekaran records, with only sparse details remaining from childhood. Nagash was known for his morbid curiosity. He would frequently shadow the Mortuary Cult during embalming rituals, and was said to have a fascination with watching people take their final breaths. Not really someone you want around you a whole lot at the family party, but you got beggars can't be choosers. Choose your family wisely. These early obsessions fueled a vow he made to himself: he would never die. Sound familiar, anybody? Nagash became the youngest of the chief priests in the Mortuary Cult, but he craved more than just knowledge of conquering death. He desired his brother's throne. So Nagash's ambitions really consumed him until one day he drugged his brother and entombed him alive within the Great Pyramid of their late father, King Ketep. Thus, approximately 4,500 years before the present day in the Warhammer universe, during the third dynasty of Khemri, Nagash crowned himself Priest King. No one in Nehekara dared to challenge his rule. With this newfound status, Nagash turned his focus to an even bolder pursuit, true immortality. He knew that while the mortuary priests had managed to prevent death from age or disease, they could still be killed. He proved this himself when he murdered his former master and high priest. With his loyal acolyte Arkan, later to be known Arkan the Black, Nagash embarked on a quest for ultimate immortality. They soon realized their current magical practices, bound by ritual and religious customs, were insufficient. Just as hope seemed lost, however, they encountered a group of dark elves that were stranded on their coast. Capturing these unfortunate souls and a sorceress, Nagash stole their spellcraft, twisted it to suit his purpose, and expanded the boundaries of his magic. Now, to ensure these dark elves couldn't go on and hinder his work or sabotage it, Nagash kept them drugged and subjugated them to an unimaginable torture, and this went on for decades. One of the most valuable insights Nagash gained from the dark elf sorceress was an understanding of the winds of magic and the properties of obsidian as its magical dampener, right? The knowledge allowed Nagash to realize the rituals were really unnecessary, and he could have weaved spells directly into the winds of magic. Once he had extracted the knowledge, or at least everything he could from the dark elf sorceress, it said he gouged out her eyes, cut out her tongue, and cut her hands and feet off, and put an iron cage around her head, and entombed her in the bottom of his black pyramid. I put all that in there because you gotta get it through, like, just what a D-bag this guy really is. And by the way, he used an obsidian dagger when doing all this nonsense. And she is still alive. He entombed her alive, so let that be known too. Now, Nagash shared his newfound knowledge with his acolytes, including Arkan, his homeboy. As centuries passed, they refined their mastery of dark magic until they seemed fairly godlike to the people of Nehekara. Even the most skilled mortuary priests were no match for the slowest of Nagash's disciples. With power came tyranny. Nagash's rule became increasingly abusive, and as time marched on, the Black Pyramid was completed. The colossal structure served as more than just a mausoleum, though. It was an active conduit that drew in and stored vast reservoirs of magic, tainting the land and sickening the populace. This corruption became the breaking point. The rulers of Lahmia, Zandri, Numas, Marak, Libras, and Settra united at the behest of King Alcadizaar. The resulting war was cataclysmic, leaving deep scars on Nehekara. Thousands and thousands of lives were lost, and the conflict endured for so long that King Alcadizaar didn't even get to live to see the end of it. His son took up the fight in his stead. In the end, Nagash was defeated, fleeing into the depths of the Black Pyramid, where he disappeared. His acolytes were captured, beheaded, and put to the torch, and the Nehekarans vowed to erase every trace of this dark chapter from their history. Nagash, however, is a sly guy. He managed to retreat and found himself at the base of a cave in Crippled Peak. In this isolation, he would discover the key to defying death: raw magic in the form of warpstone. Initially finding only small fragments, Nagash soon unearthed a concentrated deposit. And like anyone, he consumed warpstone in various forms, drinking warpstone-laced water and inhaling warpstone powder. This kind of transformed him in this grotesquely, nasty monstrosity. His skin started sloughing off, his eyes decayed into glowing green orbs and pits in his head, and his nails hardened to diamond-like talons, allowing him to consume even more raw material. He was a fiend for this warpstone. Eventually, Nagash shed all remnants of humanity and bound his soul to his decaying body, becoming truly beyond death's reach. Never fully alive, but also not dead. During this period of warpstone-filled transformation, so some would say maybe, drug-induced transformation, Nagash achieved one of his greatest feats. He merged the ritualistic spellcraft of the Mortuary Cult with the dark sorcery learned from the Druki, creating a new school of magic called Necromancy. Now, this magic centered on manipulating death and achieving immortality. This was also Nagash's main obsession. He practiced relentlessly, frequenting burial sites near Cripple Peak and raising the dead as his minions. In time, Nagash perfected his art to the point where he could animate corpses with mere thoughts. So with his growing undead army, Nagash constructed Nagazaar, a fortress infamous for its extensive use of warpstone and warpstone refinement. The local tribes were really kind of captured and brought before him and transformed into soldiers in his dead legion, but over time they would begin to revere Nagash as a god, which really stoked his ego. These tribes people would later become the Nagashi, and they would clad themselves in dark armor and serve alongside the dead. However, Nagash's expansion soon drew the attention of the Skaven, and you know how much the Skaven liked that warpstone. This hunger for warpstone prompted the Council of 13 to declare war. Battles raged above and below Nagazaar, with the Skaven suffering heavy losses in each skirmish. Tiring of the conflict, however, Nagash offered the Skaven a deal: warpstone in exchange for human slaves. Begrudgingly, they agreed because their losses were very numerous at this time, and something was better than nothing. The prolonged exposure to the warpstone, however, began to corrupt the land, affecting plants, animals, and most crucially, the Nagashi. To prevent their complete loss to the dark gods of chaos, Nagash decreed that they would consume only human flesh, starting with the elderly and the recently deceased that were still warm. Over time, this twisted his followers into ghoulish creatures driven by a hunger for human flesh, later known as crypt ghouls. But Nagash did not care. As long as they obeyed his commands without question, what did he care what they looked like or how they acted? To move forward, we must go back a decade before Nagash's defeat by King Lahmia. Foreseeing his potential downfall, Nagash dispatched priests of his cult to embed themselves into the court of local rulers, appearing as if they had barely escaped his wrath. However, these priests had far more sinister intentions. They were tasked with spreading Nagash's teachings covertly. Among these priests was Ushoran, or Ushoran. I freaking am going to butcher this, my bad. The eldest and most learned of the Lich Priests. He insinuated himself into the court of Lahmia and became the tutor of a young woman named Neferata, meaning beautiful sun. Under Ushoran's tutelage, Neferata developed an insatiable desire for arcane knowledge, a passion forbidden for young women outside the cult. Ushoran exploited Neferata's thirst for forbidden knowledge, using her to steal Nagash's scrolls from the burning pyre and secretly studied them with her. As Neferata delved deeper into the dark text, she began to harbor resentment towards the Mortuary Cult and really started sympathizing with Nagash. And Ushoran fed right into this discontent, framing the cult as unjust, oppressive, and over time, Neferata became as obsessed with defying death as Nagash himself, conducting experiments under Ushoran's guidance. However, she was a bit cautious. Discovery by the Mortuary Cult would most certainly mean death and the destruction of all her work. And though the Mortuary Cult would go on to grow suspicious of Neferata, they lacked concrete proof to act against her. Instead, they would do little petty things like undermine her in her position in court, and this would also drive Neferata deeper into her studies. And Ushoran knew that and would actively push this. At this point, she would discover the brutal, potent magic that she would eventually wield against the Mortuary Cult. The Mortuary Cult, realizing she was dabbling in Nagash's forbidden knowledge, unleashed Ushabti to kill her. Ushoran raised the palace guard to defend her, but they were obliterated by the stone contracts, just utterly defeated. And just when defeat seemed imminent, Neferata emerged from her chambers alongside Ushoran, casting bolts of arcane energy that shattered the Ushabti. In the aftermath, Neferata rallied her remaining guards and ordered them under Ushoran's guidance to execute any members of the Mortuary Cult as traitors. Ushoran, seizing the moment, pointed out those who opposed him and his cabal, even if they weren't part of the Mortuary Cult, and this would allow him to consolidate power in the region while also furthering his plan. With his adversaries eliminated, Neferata fully embraced her heresy and replicated many of Nagash's dark experiments. One of these was the elixir of immortality. After consuming the potion, Neferata experienced excruciating pain, convulsions, and near death until she emerged feeling stronger, faster, and more intelligent than ever. However, there was a price. She had developed an insatiable thirst for human blood. Neferata had become the first vampire, followed by Ushoran, which I think is really interesting because now you're looking at like a Lich Priest also taking on immortality through mortality potion. So what this does, this defies the common belief among Imperial scholars that death is required to become a vampire. Neferata's transformation proved otherwise. Now, by this time, 8 decades had passed and Queen Neferata had not aged. While her father, brother, and grandson all ruled and died in Khemri, the people of Nehekara began to suspect that the Lahmians were cursed, especially as the women were strikingly beautiful, yet avoided marriage alliances. The truth, however, was far worse. Neferata had begun turning nobles into vampires, including her bodyguard. In order to kind of dispel some of the stuff going around, Queen Neferata kind of holds a court, and now she goes by Neferata. She changed her name to act like it's a new person. She's holding this court, and she's met with one of her favorite cousins, Queen Khalida. And in this court, they kind of know, Queen Khalida kind of gets the feel that something's up, so she challenges Neferata. Neferata kills her, tries to give her the blood kiss and turn her into a vampire, but Queen Khalida ain't having none of that. She prays up to the god of Asaph, and he purges her blood, and she dies and becomes entombed and all this other nice stuff. And this is important for when I do another video on the vampires later, but just know right now, Queen Khalida is now dead. Neferata killed her, and she is extremely regretful of it. But when Neferata kind of took on this role as vampire and started turning her subjects, they ran into a bit of an issue. They had to maintain the secrecy. So in order to do that, she decreed that the vampires could only feed on criminals in the lower classes, keeping them as cattle. Despite their efforts, though, Ushoran, being one of the biggest problems here, started just eating whoever he wanted. The people of Lahmia began to notice, leading to unrest. However, Neferata quashed any uprising by killing hundreds of her own people, restoring order, and securing an ample food source for the vampires. Now, I think it's important that we kind of talk a little bit about the nature of what a vampire really truly is. So let's go ahead and do that. Although vampires appear human, they are anything but. With these powers they receive from vampirism, it makes them apex predators, and they must carefully manage their bloodlust to avoid descending into insanity. Those who lose control become strigoi, monstrous and wild despite their predatory nature. Vampires can retain a degree of empathy and relatability towards human, however their extended lifespans really kind of boil that away. And the fleeting nature of human lives renders such connections like really pointless. For them, the blink of 100 years is nothing. So when times change, fashions change, politics change, it's hard for them to keep up with that, and it ends up desensitizing the vampire over time and desensing them to humanity. So over the centuries, the race that they may have empathized with, that they came from, they no longer can relate to, which is pretty interesting. I mean, if you think about it, what would someone from the 1700s have to say to us, Vampires are discerning in choosing their companions for mortality. They seek out only the most intelligent, attractive, and capable individuals to turn them into their progeny. The transformation is known as the blood kiss. It involves transferring a vampire's blood to the human, inducing illness before granting them immortality if they survive. Big if on that one. These new vampires are typically weaker than the original, like the Lahmian elders, as the power dilutes through generations. However, this effect also contributes to how many people the vampire can turn. The older vampires may sire several progeny, while younger ones may only manage 1 or 2, if any. To gain strength, vampires like Manfred von Carstein's known to do, hunt down and consume the blood of stronger vampires, and they absorb their power. So that's how Manfred is able to kind of be on equal playing field as some of the older bloodlines. A Nehekara in general named Settra exposed the Lahmians as vampires. So truth's out, they're outed, they got to deal with this now. But the Nehekaran cities were unable to act immediately, leaving Queen Neferata still in control of Lahmia. Now Settra faced some complications when one of his generals, Vashinish, an illegitimate son of Lashkarzaz and related to Neferata, defected with loyal troops to warn her of Settra's plan. Recognizing Vashinish's strategic value, Neferata offered him her hand in marriage, making him king of Lahmia and turning him into a vampire. Now this decision really angered Abhorash, her bodyguard, who he also really loved her. That's the whole reason why he took on becoming a vampire, was his love for Neferata. And now with that, we move into kind of the holy war against Lahmia. Alcadizaar, a citizen of Nehekara, rose to challenge the vampire-ruled Lahmia, raising an army to overthrow the undead regime. However, Lahmia's defenses, masterminded by Abhorash and Vashinish, were extremely formidable. The city soon faced an alliance of 10 armies from Khemri, Zandri, Numas, Qatar, Narek, Rastra, Liberas, and joined by the conquered Araby states Bel Aliad, Bahagar, and Kasabar. The ensuing battle was pretty immense. Abhorash was really unparalleled in combat skill. He proved super formidable, while Ushoran unleashed necromantic spells. This confirmed kind of the superstition that he still had contact with Nagash, because necromancy at this time was still being developed by Nagash. And it's also said that Nagash was aiding all the way from Nagashazar, kind of helping him out, blowing some magic that way. Despite these efforts, Lahmia fell. Alcadizaar's forces stormed the city, burning its temple to the ground and any vampire found hiding within, which there were quite some that didn't want to take part in the fight. This whole thing was reduced to ash, and those who failed to escape were put to the torch, ensuring they would never rise again. Only the strongest survived, including Neferata, Vashinish, Abhorash, Ushoran, Ushoran, Harakete, and Matamesis. These survivors fled northwards to Nagashazar, where they would regroup and plot their next moves. Nagash, ever calculating and aware, you'll come to realize this guy's the king of hindsight knowledge, anticipated the loss of Lahmia. Now, I'm not sure if he anticipates all his defeats, or he's like one of those people that's like, I knew that was going to happen when something bad happens. But anyways, he anticipated the loss of Lahmia, and as such, he offered the surviving vampires refuge and positions as his generals, promising them new powers, and he demonstrated his influence by removing their capability to feel fear or regret. So it should be noted that at this point, Vashinish was recognized by Nagash as the leader of vampires, and as so, Nagash gifted a ring set with refined warpstone. This artifact granted Vashinish the power to command all other vampires, though it came with a caveat. If they ever defied Nagash's will, the ring would shatter, cursing all vampires. Additionally, while wearing the ring, Vashinish was said to be indestructible. With their leader appointed, Nagash began teaching the vampires the true depths of necromancy. And once they mastered commanding legions of the undead, Nagash marched on Nehekara, promising his generals the reclamation of Lahmia in return for their loyalty. However, as the battle started to unfold, Vashinish was really starting to see like the depth of which Nagash really just BS'd him in this entire ordeal. So, you know, he was starting to realize, like, he's just using us to kind of take revenge on the living, and, you know, Nagash has kind of blown smoke up our butt. He doesn't really care. We're like cannon fodder. And then on top of it, Nagash brought back Archon the Black, and now Vashinish is beholden to Archon as well, which is something that Vashinish didn't foresee and also didn't agree to. In the heat of the battle, Alcadizaar faced near certain death, but Vashinish made a pivotal decision and issued a challenge, calling all the dead away from Alcadizaar. Although Vashinish initially seemed poised for victory, Alcadizaar made a wild swing at his neck. Choosing not to parry, Vashinish allowed himself to be decapitated, freeing the vampires from Nagash's control. Now, this act led most of the vampires, except Ushoran, to flee the battlefield, but eventually Ushoran would be driven back to Nagashazar. Enraged by Vashinish's betrayal and Nagash seeing it for what it was, he decided to curse all the vampires, as was in the deal. So, one thing I want to talk about, when Nagash gave Vashinish the ring, he made him a deal. He said, you're going to have control of the vampires, but you're going to be bent to my will, and you're going to do what I tell you, or I'm going to curse all your homies. So when Vashinish challenged Alcadizaar, he saw the decapitating of his head as a way to kind of out that deal. But Nagash wasn't a fool. He could see right through this, and Nagash was like, dude, you screwed me, and now I'm going to curse the vampires. Now, it causes them, this is where their curse from sunlight comes from. Nagash caused them to have this horrible reaction from the sun. They either burn or can even explode in direct sunlight. And after their defeat, only Ushoran returned to Nagash's side. The rest, Neferata, Abhorash, Ushoran, the whole like, they all fled as far as they could from Nagashazar. It's said that Harakete reportedly escaped to the east, and Matamesis headed south or north. It should also be noted that Vashinish's body was never found, neither was his head or the mysterious ring. Following another defeat at the hands of Alcadizaar was extremely frustrating for Nagash. He was pretty PO'd at this point. Now, Nagash decided to enact a more devastating plan. Now, he aimed to wipe out Nehekara. However, Nagash's plan didn't end there. He was going to end the entire world. He was going to kill anything that was living and rob the gods of any soul until they eventually died out too. In order to accomplish this mission, he would have to scheme up a pretty dark scheme. And scheme he would. Nagash is a pro at scheming. He would send out an emissaries to drop warpstone in running rivers to eventually turn the rivers into blood and spreading sickness and death. And then on top of it, he recontacted the Skaven Council of 13, forming an alliance. And he would convince them to lure orcs into Nehekara, rewarding them with warpstone, all while concealing his true intentions. Nehekara is really undergoing a miasma of death and decay. It's spreading across the region, sparing only Alcadizaar, who is forced to watch in horror as his people, land, and family perish. It's said that his wife died, his children were killed, and at this point, Alcadizaar is really a broken down man. So when the sound of Nagash's army was heard marching and approaching towards him, the weakened guards could not hold them off, and Alcadizaar, broken by grief, was defeated. Archon captured him and shackled him, leading him to Nagash, where Nagash, almost like sinisterly evil, started reveling in his triumph, like gloating over Alcadizaar, like, you suck, Alcadizaar, I beat you. And then he begins to outline his plans for Nehekara and the entire world before casting him into a dungeon to rot, until he was needed for one last final display of power where Nagash could say, meh. Now, this is like, I like keeping this in because Nagash is really kind of glossed over these days as something of like, he's like a mustache twirling evil character, but he's really, in the old world, a big D-bag. Like, I don't know why anyone fields this model in the end times, because he's just a shit. With Alcadizaar in prison, Nagash prepared for the final invocation to awaken the dead and bring about the end of the mortal world. He consumed vast amounts of warpstone, as is his go-to, burning away the last bit of his flesh until only a skeleton clad in black armor remained. As he performed this dark ritual, Nagash scattered warp dust in the air, which coalesced in the clouds that rained black death across the rest of Nehekara, killing what little life truly remained. And as the ritual progressed, Nagash started sacrificing drugged up orcs, harnessing their souls to feel his dark spell, and the dead began to rise. White kings and soldiers spanning countless generations, and even the mighty Tomb Kings, all were compelled to serve Nagash. Yet the spell drained Nagash of every bit of energy he had, forcing him into a meditation to replenish his strength, all while all the undead started bringing themselves to Nagashazar. Now, meanwhile, the Skaven Council of 13, realizing the scale of Nagash's ambitions, really were just baffled. And they said, we need to end this dude's reign today. They entrusted the task to Alcadizaar because no rat could be trusted to get this done. Half of them were afraid, the other half they thought would chicken out, and they really needed this plan to go off flawlessly because they had attacked him at Nagashazar, and they knew that Nagash wasn't going to forgive that. They were a means to an end, as was everything else around him. They tasked Alcadizaar, they armed him with a blade of extraordinary power that they kept in a lead-lined casket to contain its energy, and the Skaven freed Alcadizaar, who took up the blade and set out for Nagash's throne room. Guided by the blade's power, Alcadizaar navigated Nagashazar and reached Nagash's chamber, where the Necromancer meditated, green light flickering faintly in his eyes, and for a moment Alcadizaar hesitated, but the memory of his lost family, kingdom, steeled his resolve. He raised his blade and struck. Nagash awoke in time to attempt a deflection, but the blade severed his arm, sending his talon hand skittering across the floor like a spider. Nagash lunged for Alcadizaar's neck, but Alcadizaar pressed the attack, driving the enchanted blade into Nagash repeatedly until the Necromancer was reduced to dust and shattered bone. After the battle, Alcadizaar took Nagash's crown and fled Nagashazar, discarding the cursed blade. He would reach the World's Edge Mountains, where he fell into the Blind River and drowned, still with a death grip on the crown that he ripped from Nagash's skull. Nagash's remains were gathered by the Skaven and burned in a warpstone fire, supposedly destroying him, though his crown and hand eluded the capture, so he was never truly destroyed. With Nagash defeated, the magic dissipated, but it could never be fully undone. I mean, Nagash had already done his work. Nehekara was left a barren wasteland, and the Tomb Kings awoke with their wills still intact, now that they were no longer enslaved to Nagash. And they waged war upon themselves until Settra the Imperishable was reawakened and established a semblance of order, shaping what would become the Land of the Dead. So that's kind of where we get with the Tomb Kings right here. We're getting kind of left off on this point. Now, we're going to meet an interesting character called Kadon, and we'll kind of bounce a little bit back and forth here and there. Alcadizaar's body was found by Kadon, a great shaman, who recognized him as a fallen warrior of significance, and out of respect for Alcadizaar, Kadon entombed him in a barrow that he built specifically for him. But he just couldn't seem to let go of the crown, which seemed to whisper promises, power, and influence. An obsessed Kadon began transcribing Nagash's teachings through the crown, telling him what was up. And he even began worshipping him as a god, which I'm sure just furthered Nagash's just love for himself. And then he started forcing his people to do the same. He mastered necromancy, creating new spells and incantations, and eventually Nagash's preserved hand found its way to Kadon. It must have sensed the crown or the power or known that Nagash was at work, because that hand knew right where to go. And when Kadon got that hand, he fashioned it into a powerful relic to further draw upon its magical reservoir. Now, Kadon's necromantic abilities expanded his influence, but it came at a cost. The dwarves of Bergvar ceased all trade and shunned the humans for their dishonorable practices. Feeling invincible, however, Kadon waged war on Bergvar. He would lose, and the necromancer of Morcain, now obsessed with power, turned on one another, ending Kadon's era of expansion. However, with his expansion ended, his dark knowledge spread across the old world and Araby, leaving a lasting legacy of shadow and death. In the Warhammer world, necromancy is defined as the art of communicating with and binding to one's service of departed souls and spirits of dead mortals. It could also be described as an art or animating the corpses and skeletons of the deceased, and even as the pursuit of immortality. Now, to think of necromancy as just one of these aspects is extremely short-sighted, for it encompasses all of these elements and more. A common question is, why is it always humans who are often primarily practitioners of necromancy? The theory is that elves, with their nearly immortal lifespan, rarely fear age or death. Dwarves lack the magical aptitude necessary to harness such dark arts. The Skaven, driven by their allegiance to the Horned Rat and their fear of the Horned Rat, refuse to learn anything else. And the Orcs have a very simplistic worldview. They see death as something that happens to others, not themselves. Thus it is with humans, in particular, who seek to master necromancy. Now, most of the time, they're not driven out of ambition a lot of the times or for power. They're driven by fear and desire to defy the inevitable. Many who begin this path may do so with noble intentions, but few possess the mental fortitude needed to resist the corruption inherent in dark magic. Over time, their purpose twists into something far more sinister. Becoming a necromancer requires overcoming significant hurdles, right? First, an aspiring necromancer must find a master willing to teach them. Oh, and that is pretty hard to do, because sometimes they just want to turn you into something that they can control and puppet, like another undead minion. Second, they have to evade the Empire's relentless witch hunters, who pursue necromancers with the same fervor they do to the devotees of the dark gods. There is, however, a sidestep you can take. Another path to learning necromancy is through studying the works of Kadon, or acquiring one of Nagash's 9 legendary books. The path of necromantic power is paved with perilous texts. These works are often incomplete and corrupted by countless copies, and filled with spells that may fail or unleash unintended consequences. One famous example is Jaquis de Nor, who animated the corpses of Musalan cemeteries only to be torn apart by them when he failed to control his creations. It's true that necromantic mastery requires unwavering dedication. The books of Nagash are the most potent grimoires. They're the blueprints to all necromantic spells out there and lesser necromantic effects. Few mortals, if any, will ever wield the spells in the way Nagash did. By the time Nagash was making his book, it's said that he was already god mode. He was pretty much up there with the gods, and his power was limitless. However, someone studying necromancy may see this as a testament to what a corrupted and disciplined mind can achieve through dedication and time. We're moving on to the Liber Mortis now, which was written by the renowned Frederick von Hall, otherwise known as Van Hall, and it provides detailed instructions on summoning and controlling the dead, as well as prolonging life by draining vitality from the living. The only complete copy resides in the Great Cathedral of Sigmar in Altdorf, though rumors persist that Manfred von Carstein also has his own copy. And then there's the Grimoire of Necronium, which was authored by Ushoran. It not only contains necromantic spells, but also dark prophecies foretelling the Empire's downfall. It is said that those who read it succumb to insanity, a fate from which there is no return. However, because that's the case, there's no proof that that does indeed happen. Pursuing necromancy comes at a grave price, right? You're messing with dark magic, which is drawn from the winds of Shyish. This magic promises power, but slowly consumes the practitioner's soul, distorting their body and mind. It is common for necromancers to become increasingly deranged as their bodies undergo grotesque changes. And these changes can go from everything to trapping your soul into a body that continues to age like a lich, or just taking some horrendous mutations to it. All the meanwhile tormenting your soul and blurring the lines between the world of the living and the world of the dead. So when you get into necromancy, a lot of the necromancers, especially the weaker ones, have a nasty fate ahead of them. Understanding how to raise and control the dead is essential for any necromancer, or for those wishing to combat them. For us, it's kind of cool to see like what goes into it when you field the army and kind of what's represented. So, zombies. These are the simplest creatures to animate. The necromancer places basic commands into the brain, which the zombie executes. Their sluggish movements stem from the reliance on decaying muscles and nerves. With a zombie, if the brain is destroyed, the animation ceases. Now, skeletons, more agile than zombies. Skeletons require continuous magical energy to remain animated, making them more difficult to control. Not significantly, but just enough. Unlike zombies, when the magic dissipates, the skeletons fall apart fairly quick. It should be noted that the magic is the only thing kind of moving the skeleton, which is why they don't move as sluggish as the zombies do, because they're not reliant on rotting muscle. They're reliant on the magic. There's golems, which are artificial constructs animated by dark magic. Now you could confuse them with the constructs that the Nehekarans raise, but where they use ritual and divine magic that's blessed through them, this is using dark magic. You're almost corrupting the ritual of the Nehekarans to kind of bastardize it and make your own. Unlike zombies or skeletons, these are created from various materials, including stone, or you could even stitch together a bunch of flesh. And they blend seamlessly into the surrounding of statues, but also it should be noted that if the caster dies, the golems will still remain with power. So that's the biggest upside, because the second the caster would die with the skeletons and zombies, they will most likely begin to dissipate. Now, spirits and ghosts. Binding these requires a high level of necromantic proficiency. These souls linger in the mortal realm, often unaware of the living, and the living unaware of them. However, binding a spirit usually captures only a fading aspect of its soul, which can turn into an enraged poltergeist. Now, the necromancer must know something about the soul in order to bind it, whether it's its name, or have known it in the past, or known it even for a minute before it died. He would be able to bind it. Now, unlike wraiths, you absolutely need to know their name. These dark entities are akin to souls bound to the mortal plane. So much like a necromancer binds his soul to his body, the race will bind their souls to this plane of existence. And they are challenging to control and sustain. For them to sustain their existence, they actually have to drain life from the living. So much like a vampire almost feeds off the blood of a human, they feed off their vigor and life source, keeping the wraith on this plane of existence. Wights. These are a fusion of necromancy and soul binding, involving the partial soul of a deceased being tied to its body. The soul must be trapped before it crosses into the ether. For once the soul is in the ether, no necromancer can get it back. The only one ever able to do so was the first and greatest necromancer, Nagash himself. He's the only one that's ever been able to pull back a single soul from the ether. Wights are often used as bodyguards and battlefield commanders for necromancers. Now, ghouls. These dudes are unlike any undead because they're still living humans. They're just altered by dark magic and cannibalism. They are feral and devoid of sanity, driven by an insatiable hunger for flesh. And it's through this cannibalism they start to lose who they were and lose any sense of being. They have no self-awareness, and they're no better than being dead. They might as well be a zombie. However, they have the brutal cunning and still the strength of something alive. Now, with the ghouls, we cannot not talk about Ushoran and the Strigoi bloodline. Ushoran, Neferata's brother, was not as charismatic or politically savvy as his sister, but he possessed a silver tongue and immense strength. His flaws, however, were pettiness and deep insecurity, which were only amplified by vampirism. After the vampires were exiled from Nagash, Ushoran longed for unity amongst his kin to build a new kingdom. However, all the other vampires kind of knew that was just because he was weak and manipulative, and none of them wanted to have him making any decisions on what they would do. They also knew that if they had a big pact together, Ushoran would surely grab the attention of Nagash. Ushoran would wander until he found his way to the World's End Mountain, where he encountered Kadon, Recognizing the artifacts that Kadon possessed, he knew that Nagash was dead, and he knew that now he had nothing to fear. So Ushoran killed Kadon and began turning the local tribes known as Strigoi into vampires. Initially, things were going really good for Ushoran. He was kind of kicking the crap out of life. I mean, he was thriving. All his brothers and sister vampires were kind of hearing about him and how great he was doing. He sent out messengers that were vampires to kind of dissuade them to coming back and visiting. Most of them knew what this was and had no intention of seeing Ushoran, and Neferata went so far as to rip the fangs out of one and drain it of its blood and send it back dead. Ushoran was a bit miffed about this, but he had some bigger issues to face as an orc invasion kind of would take him on. Now, he would go on to rip the orc war boss's head off. However, the red-eyed shaman, which was what his name was, blasted him with some green flames and caused him to disappear and dissolve and turn to dust and die. And that ended Ushoran's reign. Now, I brought up the Strigoi. Now, the Strigoi were not corrupted in the way that we would see it now. They're very much like regular vampires. But after they lost at the hands of the orc, they would go around and asking for refuge through all the other vampires. And rather than open up their homes to them and give them and treat them as refugees, Neferata, Abhorash, they started hunting them down and killing them. Anytime they'd show up in a human population, they would put them down and slay them. And it was mostly because they saw the weakness from Ushoran pass through them in his slightedness. So they didn't want anything to do with these weaker-willed vampires. And anytime they would pop up in a civilization or around people, the Lahmian bloodline would come and assassinate them. Abhorash would hunt them down. And the predators became the prey. And after a while, they were left to just feeding off of ghouls, feeding off of animals, feeding off of freshly dead corpses, and it really twisted them into these monstrosities known as Strigoi. They developed into feral creatures, and the Strigoi bloodline became twisted from then on. And this is how we see them today. Every good story must come to an end, but it does not for Nagash. Nagash would make a return to the setting, and this occurred around the time Sigmar was uniting the tribes that would become the Empire. Though his body had been burned and scattered to the winds, that did not hold back such an ambitious man as Nagash. His hand and crown and the Black Pyramid served as anchors for his soul. And over the centuries, the remnants of his dust particles reformed in this sarcophagus in the Black Pyramid, and he started getting bones and veins, and organs began to knit themselves back together, and he was once again reborn. He attempted to summon the undead of Nehekara, but without his hand and crown, he lacked some power, and the Tomb Kings hated him in life, and they hated him even more in death, so it actually caused a civil war to erupt. And this would prompt Settra to confront Nagash and confront all the people rebelling. And Nagash wasn't really having any of it, so he was like, yeah, peace, I'm out of here. Took Archon the Black to go reclaim Nagash-Azar. Nagash would get to Nagash-Azar to be further set back to see Skaven there. And they weren't just there, they were entrenched. But worst of all, the Warpstone had practically been run dry. It was completely empty. It had been centuries at this time since Nagash had come back. Nagash would wage war against the Skaven, and he would take back his fortress of Nagash-Azar, and then realize that his Warpstone refining equipment was destroyed. Despite facing Skaven assaults from the Council of 13, which were redoubling their efforts to put Nagash down, Nagash got the business and did the first thing he had to do, make a new hand since that other hand was gone. And once he had made a new metal hand with claws, he just started just being the necromancer that we saw earlier in this book. Nagash would use those hands to interrogate spirits in the surrounding area and kind of get an idea of like what happened after he was stabbed. Once he heard about what had happened with his crown and Alcadizaar going up to the World's Edge Mountains, he was like, okay, I gotta go to the World's Edge Mountains. I need to get my crown. I gotta get powerful. He gets there. It's a complete wasteland. The freaking Strigoi are gone. All of it's gone, and he has to go back and start resurrecting freaking spirits and interrogating them and torturing these spirits that already died probably at the hands of the orc. And then they tell him, yeah, you know, the vampire general you had, Ushoran, he showed up, killed Kadon, took the crown, and then was also killed by an orc. And then Nagash is kind of like, well, where'd my crown go then? Where's this orc? Well, he went to go fight Sigmar and got smashed down. So you're going to have to go find Sigmar, get your crown back. And Nagash at this point is kind of pissed. He's going up and down, traveling across the entire old world. Is like kind of like this beggar vagabond. You know, he has to kind of cloak himself because he's pretty off-putting. He's an ugly looking dude at this point with all the warpstone and all the death and stuff that's going on with him. So he makes this voyage out to Sigmar. And when he gets there, he takes up refuge in this abandoned ruins and he starts raising an army and stuff. And he finds out that Sigmar does not wear the crown. He has it under lock and key, and that's because Sigmar sensed the evil power in it and said, I ain't playing with this. This is not good. Nagash sent out a messenger on a corpse bird that was massive, and the messenger gets to Sigmar, and it's like, hey, dude, you need to give Nagash his crown back. I mean, my master's coming. He's going to take this crown whether you like it or not. You can give it to him, or he's going to pull it from your cold, dead hands. And this is the age of Sigmar, and Sigmar wasn't having none of this. He smashed that thing in the face with Galmaraz, his legendary Warhammer, and said, come get some. So after a few months, Nagash would start riling up his armies. He would start really getting in there, getting his boys together, getting all these dead dudes raised up, and then he would start marching towards the Empire. Now the Empire is just basically at its beginning stages here, and Sigmar, getting word from all these people that were pouring in that Nagash is slaughtering everyone in between here and there, Sigmar knew that Nagash was setting them up for fear tactics, and the Empire was afraid. But Sigmar in his wisdom knew that the best thing to counter fear was preparation. He worked out a deal with the dwarves, got some rune-forged weapons that were going to mess with the necromancy of Nagash, and then he would meet him on the River Reich and dish out a nasty battle. After this battle ensues, I mean, you have the Unbergen just hammering down Undead thrusting rusted spears in the Unbergen, taking them out. Sigmar's kind of looking across the battlefield, looking for Nagash. There comes this rotten skeleton, green glowing eye socket on a chariot, and Sigmar knows that's his target. He rallies the Unbergen, smashes through the undead lines, dives on the chariot, tackles Nagash off the chariot, and starts freaking dueling with him. And it's pretty paired. This is the first time in Nagash or Sigmar's time they're really going up against equal. It's godlike person versus godlike dead person, and they're smashing each other. And Nagash is waving his rune sword, and Sigmar's bringing Galmaraz down, and finally he forces Nagash into the River Reich. But Nagash knows that if he doesn't get it together, he's toast. So he plucks Sigmar right in the arm with his sword, which it was poisoned. So Sigmar knows he's got limited time now. He's feeling the poison kind of take effect, and he's just waving Galmaraz like it's no one's business. And finally, both warriors, tired of and exhausted from combat, catch each other in a lock. Sigmar's weakening. Nagash sees that Sigmar's it. He's just waiting to buy time to get him. And Sigmar goes nope, forces through it, and slams Galmaraz in Nagash's head, cracking his noggin open and releasing all that black magic into the air to fly back to the Black Pyramid, where he will metastasize later on in the setting, I think around the end times. However, Nagash, in true Nagash fashion, doesn't just eat it. He gives out this nasty war cry yell, and everyone's kind of like, what the heck did he say? They've never heard this language before. But the vampires, they heard what Nagash said. And Nagash said, I curse you for not showing up to help me yet again. And anytime someone uses the word Sigmar, it will push you back, just as Sigmar has pushed me back. And there's another curse now for the vampires, and it's really starting to look like, dude, Nagash is just racking up curses on everybody. Pretty infamous character. But with that, his body is reknitting itself back in the Black Pyramid, and he'll make a return later in the end times. To close the book out, we get a rapid fire of the last bit of the bloodline, so let's get into it. So Neferata would go on to establish her kingdom in the World's Edge Mountains at the Silver Pinnacle. It was once a dwarven stronghold, however, she and her undead hosts conquered the crap out of it. Over the centuries, tales of the Silver Pinnacle lured travelers, knights, and merchants to seeking the rumored queen to sell their wares or ask for her hand. Now, contrary to expectations of what might think a vampire court would be, Neferata's realm was really well kept, and it was bathed in perpetual moonlight. Her court composed entirely of beautiful women, and these women would engage in espionage across Tilia, Bretonia, and the Empire. These vampire maidens, they were actually sent out to marry nobles, spreading Neferata's influence. And the biggest thing that the Lahmian bloodline really benefits from is communication. It's said that Neferata and all of her agents spread throughout the old world keep constant contact with her, so they know everything that's going on, and it's allowed her to lay this interconnected network of information and influence. Abhorash is really cool. He was a legendary warrior in life and even more legendary in death. He drank from the elixir out of his love to Neferata, and when he did that, vampirism only exacerbated his good qualities as well as his bad qualities. His bloodlust would start to get out of control. He would start eating just tons of people, having all these problems, really overindulging himself, but damn, he was a good warrior. So Abhorash, when Vashanesh sacrificed himself to release them from Nagash's will, Abhorash would go and seek something that would quench this bloodthirsty craze of his. So finally he'd slaughter dwarves, he'd slaughter orcs. Orcs have stories about throat rippers because this dude was just hunting everything down. And finally Abhorash found the thing he'd been looking for. A dragon. He would duel with this dragon. The dragon would be whirling waves of fire out, and Abhorash just diving around and jumping around. And finally, it said he just dived his fangs into his neck and drained the dragon empty. I don't know how he fit all that in him, but he did. And then threw the body off the side of the mountain and said, I did it. Now, he looked at his homies and he's like, look guys, you guys want to hang out with me? I'm the coolest person around. You got to get strong like me. There's no room for weakness in my vicinity because I just drink dragon blood. Now, I guess I should go into what the dragon blood did. It cured his hunger for blood. So now he's a vampire with all the benefits and none of the downsides, minus his arrogance. I mean, that's still there. And he would go on and send his lackeys out to become better warriors till they were able to slay their own dragon, drink its blood, and then join him at his side. One of his progeny included a warrior by the name of Walish, and he ended up conquering Blood Keep in the Empire, turning all their knights into vampires. Now, the vampire knights were known as the Ordo Draconis. For anyone that's looking to paint some blood knights, that's a pretty cool origin. And they became really fearsome for having a reputation of just eating everything that came across their border. They would indulge themselves a lot in hunts and eat a lot of people, drink a lot of blood. And finally the Empire caught on that this is going on. Word got out, and that's really rare because the Ordo Draconis would kill anybody that saw stuff going on. Finally, the Empire caught wind, and they razed Bloodkeep to the freaking ground and hunted every vampire that they thought they did to extinction. However, legend tells a different story. The Ordo Draconis is renewing their vows every 50 years, with Wallace as the Grand Master of the Order all those years later. Ushoran is another vampire who would eventually get his own demise. Ushoran was the only vampire that remained by Nagash's side during the final battle. And he was rewarded for this with the copies of Nagash's books, the 9 books that is. After Nagash's defeat, Ushoran returned to Lahmia, harboring a vision of wiping out all life, and then with so kind of taking out vengeance on the gods themselves. Obsessed with mastering necromancy, he kept diving deeper and deeper and deeper into the spirit world. And it should be noted that Ushoran's the only vampire that didn't go out of his way to create this grand kingdom for himself. He really stayed loyal to Nagash and his cause. So in doing so, he really dived into those 9 books that Nagash gave him and started practicing necromancy like it was no one's business. As he delved into the spirit world, he struggled compared to some of his disciples, and Melchior, Ushoran's most ambitious student, would end up usurping him by attacking Ushoran while he was in a trance. You see, Ushoran wasn't able to go into the spirit world without going into a trance to do so, and it's believed Melchior saw that as a weakness. So Melchior sucked his master's blood dry and ate his body over the course of 3 days to absorb the power of his master. And as we talked about the vampires, that's one thing they do, they absorb that power. And as he did that, he established himself as the master of the bloodline and then would change the name to the Necrarchs. Now this line became known for their grotesque corpse-like appearance. I personally believe that's because Ushoran was a lich priest before becoming a vampire, and I have a feeling that whatever was in him spread to his kin, but it never outright says that. Now it says they have a grotesque corpse-like appearance and fanatical pursuit of necromantic knowledge, and is preparing for one day when their master Nagash will return. They'll all be ready to bring back the dead and take on the living. Now, it should be noted that the Empire doesn't really believe that the Necrarchs exist because they've never really seen one, but Manfred von Carstein assures they're in there. They're just hidden in the deepest, darkest places of the world, waiting for their master to return. The last bit's something none of us aren't familiar with. We got Sylvania. Sylvania is more than just a region. It's a land where darkness is almost tangible and necromantic power courses through the very soil. Known as the epicenter of death and dark ritual, Sylvania serves as a breeding ground for the necromancers and their practices. In this cursed realm, natural light seems to shun the landscape, yielding to an ever-present shroud of fog that blurs the line between life and death. The connection between Sylvania and necromancy runs deep, with a history steeped in forbidden and arcane arts. This land has long been a haven for those who seek to harness the powers of death, creating a perfect storm for necromancers to expand their dominion. Its geology, shadow-cloaked forests, and roiling hills haunted by legends and crumbling ruins, forgotten by time, bear witness to the dark past and the foreboding present. Sylvania's legacy, however, is defined by its rulers, particularly the infamous von Carstein family, who turned it into a necromantic stronghold. Under their reign, Sylvania transformed from a neglected backwater into a formidable seat of power, launching dark crusades that extended their influence over the lands beyond. The von Carstein dynasty is woven intricately into Sylvania's storied history. Tracing their lineage to Vashnesh, the progenitor of the bloodline, the von Carsteins embody ambition and dark sorcery. Vashnesh's legacy runs like a dark thread through the fabric of Sylvania lore. And remember, Vashnesh was the one that allowed Alcadizaar to behead him to break the pact with Nagash. With each of his descendants displaying an unyielding hunger for power, mastery, and necromancy, and relentless ambition, the combination of intelligence, charisma, and ruthless cunning has made them some of the most formidable rulers in Warhammer history. Among them, Vlad von Carstein stands as the most iconic figure, which I will cover in my Vampire Wars breakdown. His reign was defined by strategic brilliance and ruthless expansion, which led to epic battles and fierce territorial conflicts. Vlad's near invincibility and iron resolve instilled both fear and respect in friend and foe alike. Under his leadership, Sylvania became an impregnable fortress of undeath, and its borders were reinforced by its command over necromantic forces. Now, Vlad's death did not mark the end of the dynasty's ambitions. However, one of his successors, such as Manfred von Carstein, fought to maintain and expand the dynasty's power. Known for his cunning and relentless pursuit of dominance, Manfred schemed tirelessly to outshine Vlad's legacy, cementing the family's control over Sylvania while plotting new conquests. Each heir of Vashnesh possessed a unique blend of traits passed down through their vampiric bloodline. An insatiable lust for power, a master of necromantic arts, and a vision of supremacy that transcended their individual ambitions. Their rule was marked by endless power struggles and allegiances and alliances driven by singular purpose, to secure dominance within Sylvania and expand their dark influence. The constant cycle of betrayal and conquest solidified Sylvania's status as a place where death was not just a presence, but a reigning force. With that being said, that is going to wrap us up for the Liber Necris. What a freaking awesome read. Now, if you guys want to read it for yourself, I'll find a link. You can download it, I think. I have the physical copy. I wouldn't recommend paying all these prices for it that I've seen on the internet. And the physical copy was actually lent to me by my buddy Nate, so I have to give him a shout out and say thanks for letting me use the book, dude. It was a great read. With the Vampire Counts being a free legacy PDF, I implore anybody who's interested in Warhammer the Old World to go check it out. It's on the Warhammer page. I'll have a link below for that too. Give it a look. If you got the models and they're on rounds, go ask someone at your local store if they'll play a game. Most people are understanding of the bases, and get some games in and have some fun. Everybody, I want to say thank you for your time. Have a wonderful day. Peace.